Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the things that is super cool about my relationship with my guides and my experience of being a professional shamanic practitioner is that even though I've been doing work on behalf of people with my guides for over 20 years, I still have new, really cool, elegant things that the guides teach me and show me and come up with and offer as I'm doing work on behalf of people. And I had one about restoring personal power and restoring your voice that I would love to share, because I think whether you're working with me, whether you have your own practice, whether the model and the framework helps you make some shifts psychologically and emotionally. I work with the energy, but those are other ways that you can engage that'll move and shift things. I think this framework could be really helpful. Hence, the journey that I did for my participants in my chakra program created the inspiration for this particular podcast. So just a note, while I absolutely have every intention of giving you some options to work with this on your own, and the map may be enough if you have your own practice, if you do want to have my support with it, there are a couple of ways to do that. So I'm planning to create a $25 healing where I offer this particular protocol. So if you're not on my mailing list, it would be good to be on that so you can find out when that's on offer, because I do these really cool little protocols and pieces of healing that go really deep in a group environment every month, and I keep the price point really affordable. So at least as of now, that's one model of my business. Also, this is something, if you do work one-on-one with me, is another idea of something to ask for. There's an amazing scope of what I can do on behalf of people, including like clearing properties and helping with destiny paths to travel, and just so much that I can do. But it's very hard to sort of list all those possibilities. And so if this is something you listen to and you're somebody who works with me and you're like, oh wow, I'd love to have that, that sounds amazing, it's also something I can put in as part of a one-on-one session. And of course, a whole group of people got it in my once a year chakra program. So I offer the chakra program for 8 months where we do 4 journeys to support each of the chakras that just really rebuilds and heals things that may have gotten out of alignment. Maybe a chakra didn't develop properly because the situation wasn't very needs met, or maybe there was an adaptive behavior, or maybe you've kind of pulled your energy out of that chakra, or a lot of stagnant energy is built up. So it's a really deep opportunity while people, just kind of go on with their lives. Maybe they listen to the journey reports while they do dishes, but over the course of those 8 months, their energy body is getting stronger and learning to work with itself, because a lot of the human suffering has to do with arguments between the chakras, where one chakra is a hell no and one chakra is a hell yes. And they end up in a power struggle. And that's one of the biggest energy leaks that we have. And, if you're having a lot of chronic fatigue, there could be a lot of causes, but one of them might be that you're having an internal argument where one part of you is unilaterally vetoing another part of you that has some really important things. So all of this is complicated and interconnected, but I want to dive down into this piece that the guides were working with about power and voice. So in the shamanic journey work, the first thing that the guides wanted to work with was clearing what's known as learned helplessness. And it's actually a psychological term. As a shamanic practitioner, I'm saying, let's go in and dismantle the structure of learned helplessness in your field that makes it feel like there's no point in moving in any direction. So this is a term coined when you just absolutely have no option to get away from an adverse circumstance. There's nothing you can do, and you may try and attempt and have different things. Then when the circumstances change and there actually is a path to create release, and to get away from something that, is really adverse, it's shown that we tend not to take it because we've learned that nothing is helpful. So we just end up enduring something, kind of like once the door of the cage is open, it not occurring to you to walk out, it not occurring to you to choose again. And in childhood, there's a certain amount of not having the choice to rehome ourselves. As adults, we can quit the abusive job. It may be really scary. There may be a lot of tensions. We may want to be really strategic about how we move with that. Or if you're leaving a relationship where you're just not okay with how the person is participating, that can be really complicated, but we have that agency. We have that ability to move. But as children, we don't. And so there can be this experience where no matter what you do as a child, a certain circumstance that's very adverse for you ends up persisting. I work with a lot of people whose mothers were under stress state, and one of the ways that people, particularly women, can respond to stress is perfectionism. Okay, I got to keep everything has to be perfect or something terrible is going to happen, which is very much an instinctive activation. So our brain on instincts does not bring out the best in us. And as a result, the parent was constantly critical. Nothing was good enough. They would, have a new demand. And, the child never felt like they were enough, that they were seen. In mom trying to control everything and hold it together, she wasn't really available for heart connection and love and playfulness. When we feel under stress state and we have tension in our bodies, that shuts down curiosity, empathy, playfulness. And a lot of people had a lot of their childhood with less of that than would have been really optimal for them, that was, not particularly present or in short supply. And that would be something where that person would be unpleasable no matter how hard you tried. You would be unable to please them. And ideally, as adults, we have discernment where when we're forming relationships, we recognize that for ourselves and others, there's a lot of happiness that's an inside job. And for sure, adverse circumstances will diminish happiness. And it's very good. I would never advocate that someone, who's in a domestic violence relationship work on happiness as an inside job. I don't think that's the right medicine or wisdom for that person. But when things are good at the level of baseline, looking to that for ourselves, and then also choosing to invest deeply in relationship with people who are working on that on their own behalf. Because if you come from that trauma of someone who's unpleasable, and then you have someone else who is also, you can't win at making them happy, they're not pleasable, that can be really, really difficult. But that learned helplessness can make it so that even as an adult, when we have our full agency and choice, we end up not moving. We end up not making other choices. And a lot of times that comes down to the chakra argument. I've worked with people in domestic violence situations, and a lot of times, they're really torn. Part of them would really like to leave, and part of them would really like to stay. And they're in argument with reality because they're not at that moment willing to leave, but they're not okay with getting hurt. And it's a really tough place to be and to be experiencing. And so one of the things that you can do if you're like, oh, wow, I have this learned helplessness, so I may not see where I can move and choose again because, I got caught up in trying to talk my partner out of drinking, and it's absolutely untrue that if someone loved us more, they would clean up their addiction. It just isn't. They can love you down to the depth of their soul, and they can be really addicted, and both can be true simultaneously. The one doesn't have anything to do with the other. The health of the relationship and whether it's good to be in partnership with them and whether you choose to stay or go has a lot to do with them being available for that. But a lot of times, we get into these kind of kerfuffles and we learn and we grow and we have our list for dating, like, oh, wow, if, I get on a couple first dates and this person, throws back 5 drinks in an hour, maybe I won't go forward. Maybe I won't give them my number. There's this opportunity to learn and grow, but we want to free up all of our power and our movement and our ability to see all the options and the possibilities and really, really gain that we have through agency and experience. And so in working with this for the energetic dismantling, if you don't choose to work with me to have me do this on your behalf, fire ceremony, I have one on the articles page of my website under the resources tab, is a really good way to work with dismantling this energy in your field that is the cage and the restriction of learned helplessness. We're wanting to take that out so we restore freedom and access to movement and possibility consciousness and all of these cool things. I think it's also just really useful to do a little bit of journaling or unpacking with a therapist or just kind of noticing where it shows up so you can kind of have an eye on it for where you might not be apt to use your full power, where your life experiences have tended to make it feel like there were no other options, because we're ultimately calorie saving creatures, even though we now have secure access to food. And one of the ways this plays out is if we don't think something's going to work, we won't commit our time and energy. So our brain is kind of trying to shut down anything that's too much effort or too much instability. And it's just a part of ourselves that I feel like we want to keep an eye on, because it's one of the ways our brains will lie to us. There are a number of biases and things where our brains are not representing reality when they tell us the story of the world. And the more we know about that, the more choice and agency we have, and the more we can move from an authentic expression of human spirit that's grounded in care and concern for the well-being of the human animal. So again, no big pendulum swings, but are just parts of us that are better for charting a really holistic, needs met for all the chakras kind of course in our lives. So once we clean up learned helplessness, the next piece to work with is this concept of power retrieval. And if you're somebody who is adept, who does have your practices, who does shamanic journey, this may be something you can just go talk to your guides about. Hey, I want to bring back any power that I put aside, because one of the ways that we may have strategically had more needs met was to disown parts of ourselves. And there are all kinds of different parts of ourselves that we maybe put aside. If you have somebody as an adult whose energy is really heavy, your sort of exuberant, silly child self can be really triggering. I think for my mom, when my sister and my energy got too kind of wound up and big and expressive, it was kind of annoying. And I can't say that I blame her, because, I see kids in that really kind of expansive, giddy state, and I'm kind of wanting to create a little more distance from the noise and energetic disruption of that. But we may put aside parts of ourselves. And one of the parts that we may put aside is our personal power to keep us out of power struggles that are going to cost us something. So this can be something that we give up or release or get disconnected from in childhood, or it can show up in a relationship. I recently read the book, The Power of Regret, and musing on regrets, how I allowed certain partners to treat me. And that's totally on me, because I didn't leave. I, in fact, have somebody that I was very much in love with. We were even talking marriage. It didn't work out. Happily, he's married to someone else. But we ended up being really good friends. And when the subject of the past comes up, he'll say, "I'm so sorry. I was such a jerk." And I'll say, I have my part in it, because other people who treated me that way and who did so before and after you, I left. Like, oh, this person has ambivalence. Part of them wants to connect with me, part of them doesn't. Life's too short. I'm over it. I'm done. You go work yourself out. And I was really compelled with this, so I kept strategizing and working and putting up with things and making things that weren't okay with me okay, and getting resentful. And, it just wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't abusive, but, it surely tied up a lot of emotional knots inside of me and made my head really loud, and was really a leak of other life experiences that I could have been having during that time while I was working some stuff out. I've held space for a lot of women who were just really in argument with who the man they were in love with was being in the world. I've worked with people who really needed monogamy, which is so legitimate, and yet they wouldn't break up with a man who was completely straightforward, that he loved her, he wanted her around, he enjoyed her a lot, but he wasn't available to make a commitment, and he wasn't interested in being non-monogamous. And granted, when some of the clients I was working with in that regard made a move to really disconnect, there was a bid to reconnect because, the guy didn't actually want her to go away, but he was really clear that he wasn't available for what would have authentically worked for her. And so recovering and bringing back this power, there may be different rituals or approaches for what this means to you. You can certainly put it into the fire ceremony. I invite my power back. I invite my power to come return to me. Personally, for me, it's an energetic intervention, very much like the soul retrieval process, where I gather this thing that is your displaced and disowned or put aside personal power, and I restore it to you. So I, of course, have I do the thing, which I know isn't a very helpful description for the DUI approach to, do it yourself. I think I said the initials for that wrong. So the approach where you're doing it on your own, it's an energetic intervention that's very sophisticated, isn't all that helpful. So this may be an area where you want to get some help from me or someone else who's qualified. But, if you have a good bit of experience working with energy, this may be something you can call back and invite back for yourself. But this notion of reclaiming and gathering in your power, not that you need to use it in unsophisticated ways to take on the world and fight everything in your path, but there's a really nice, elegant way that someone who holds their power in a really clear, balanced way with a lot of skill and sophistication can move dynamically through the world. There's just a lot of cool stuff that comes together with this. And so the journey that I got to do today for my participants in my chakra program, that was a really beautiful piece of work that I got to do on their behalf. And then the next part is reconnecting power to voice, because a lot of times we've spoken up and our words weren't received, and maybe we didn't say them powerfully, and maybe we were speaking to someone who had a vested interest in not hearing us. So there's a lot of counter moves where, somebody goes to therapy and they figure out what their core truth is, and they go home and try to express it, and they get shut down in some way because there's a threat to the status quo or a power dynamic or something that is in the way. So with the partner that I mentioned earlier in the recording, the guy I was involved with for a while, I realized at some point how I would start to express something really clearly and kindly and appropriately in a way that was having a lot of success with everyone in my life except him. And he would roll his eyes or say, "You're so sensitive," or, just say, like there was some kind of counter move that made me have to tolerate even more tension every time I tried to do that. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm working so hard on really clear, kind, not making anybody bad and wrong, but being able to speak my truth and hear the other person, this sophisticated communication skills. And everywhere in my life, people are really happy to hear and receive, and it's more skillful than when I tried to explain why they were bad and wrong, and therefore they should do it my way, except for this one relationship. I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, oh, I really see it. And I didn't act on it at the time, but I got really clear about that. Oh, this is what it's like when someone has a counter move where they make it expensive to say something they don't want to hear. And some people, it's really subtle, a little passive aggressive eye roll. And for other people, it's more overt. They escalate the situation. They yell, they stomp, they, storm out of the house. And again, there are better ways to communicate and worse ways to communicate. But there are also people who their strategy is not to be available. I think it's just important to note that you can't necessarily change someone with your voice. I spent a lot of time feeling like if I could just find the perfect words with my first partner, that he would be different, and he'd swear that he would, and he would hear me, and he would nod, and he would gaze into my eyes, and he would be empathetic about the feelings that came up for me when he binge drunk at public events, which he didn't do very often, but he would swear never again, and I'm so sorry, and we'd have this big processing conversation, and then he'd do it again because that was something that he was working out at the time. And when we finally broke up, I really haven't talked to him, not because I was mad at him and not because I hated him, but I spent so much time trying to be heard about the impact of things that it was just such a blissful relief not to try to be heard by him ever again. So my rule is to feel into whether someone's receptive to communication. And now for me, it's a gift because it's a collaboration that moves the relationship forward. So I do the emotional processing, so I'm not in the heat of the moment. I make an effort to understand before I try to be understood. There's a lot of sophistication, but if I'm talking to somebody about something crunchy, it's because I care about deepening the relationship and to have the impact. And if they're not receptive, then I'll find a way to take care of myself where I either decide I can live with the behavior, I decide to make, better choices for myself. It could be as simple as, this person's going to show up late, so I'm just going to go ahead and order lunch. I don't really have people who are late. I tend to run 5 minutes late if we're being really factual about things. But, they're just these different ways where I can say, okay, I can stay in the relationship and I just need to take responsibility for this outcome. Or maybe I step away. But if somebody is really emotional, whether it's me or the other person, that's not a good time to talk. So if I feel like my little girl wants to take her toys and go home, I'm going to go sit in the hot tub and work with leveling the waters before I try to communicate. Katie in her 20s wrote really long, complicated emails when I was triggered with somebody that explained, so much about what they'd done wrong. And I reread them and I thought about them and I came up with a thing that I thought was perfect. And then I sent them and I had this relief because I was expressed. But then, giving people pages and pages of communication as this wall of communication out of the blue didn't get very good results. And then when I actually kind of cooled down, I had a lot of vulnerability because it sure didn't make the person come back and talk to me. So much as I don't like it when there's tension and there isn't an opportunity to talk about it, I've learned to hold space for myself, because one of the ways that I pushed past people's boundaries in my 20s was trying to be heard by them when they had been clear they weren't available. There was just so much tension that I would, I would not manage myself to sit with that. That was too scary and hard. I'd rather escalate a conflict that was engaged rather than, go sit with this emotional tension. So again, really good reasons I plunked my butt down in therapy and stayed there for a number of years and continue to get facilitated personal inquiry as part of my process, because I think it's really important. But not trying to be heard by someone who's emotional, not trying to be heard by someone who's just not receptive. They're not available to hear you, or their core truth is they're not available to do something differently. And again, that's the sophistication of not just listening to someone's words, but listening to their actions as well. What do they say? Okay, what do they do? What does that tell me? There's a woman named Alison Armstrong, and she talks about kind of this escalation in communication where you insist and you enforce. So you don't just tell. You go through a process of getting clearer and clearer, and you have to follow through on the consequence. So if you say, if you do this thing, I'm going to leave you, it's probably a good idea to not say that unless you're absolutely clear that that will be the outcome and you're willing to follow through. And again, therapy, support, helping people to be heard. Relationships are super complicated. I'm super geeky about communication in relationships. But when we talk about connecting your power to your voice, it's making it this beacon, this clarion bell of clear, authentic, true expression, bringing those circuits back online so that you can express clearly and powerfully and in a way that's energetically aligned, and then see what the result is and move accordingly in the world based on that information. So there's a lot here, but at the core of it, we want to clear away the times when you had learned helplessness because you were either a child in a situation and just didn't have the full agency and choice and ability to walk away from a bad situation, or as an adult where you were choosing not to meet some other need, whether it was addiction or attachment, or love. Sometimes those all intersect when we stay in unhealthy relationships, or the financial security of a job that wasn't working for other parts of you, or, whatever it may have been. There may have been something where you ended up putting aside your power and your agency because there just wasn't a way to have needs met and keep the situation stable. You would have had to give up stability of the situation in order to alleviate something. And if it was something that was a deal breaker, that ends up being really unsustainable. It's really expensive to remain in a situation that is authentically a deal breaker for some part of you. And a lot of people do it a lot of the time. I have a lot of compassion for it. I've certainly done that. But there's never really a settled, peaceful opportunity to have success and ease and sustainability when that's something that's going on. There's always an overarching tension and pain and frustration and strategizing in the back of your mind what else you could try to manipulate or be heard or change the circumstances or get them to do it your way. And, it's a tough place to be. So I love to support people in finding more sustainability and success. One thing we have a whole heck of a lot of as humans, and being able to seek out relationships and invest in them where there's opportunity for a lot more success and needs met, I think is a really good skill and thing to invest in. So I know there's a lot here. And again, this is meant to be inspiration for people who have their own practices. It's meant to illuminate something that I can offer on your behalf. And you can start to work with this as a journaling exercise, as fire ceremony, as intentions or affirmations. But however you want to work with it, there's a lot of what changes is off of focus and intention. So we're wanting to clear away learned helplessness from our energy field. We're wanting to repattern, the kind of places in our brain. We want to activate neuroplasticity so our brain can reprocess things in a way that doesn't have these restrictions on what we see and perceive and the possibilities we notice. We want to gather our power back, and we want to have it connected to our voice. And I think that investing in really good communication skills as a learnable skill set, as well as kind of an underlying sense of principles of health, because you can be in healthy communication even if other people aren't available to it. I picked up a call. It was right when it was like an hour before a client was calling in, and I don't usually pick up calls I don't recognize, but some people get the time zones wrong, and I wanted to check in with her if that was the case. Ended up being a sales call, and I said immediately when he started talking, "Please take me off your list." And it's one of those really aggressive, well, why is that? And I'm like, I don't want sales calls. And he's like, "Oh, this isn't a sales call, blah, 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 blah." And I hung up on him and I blocked the number. But if I hadn't been triggered and annoyed at my boundary, take me off your list, don't call my number, which, not personal, he just has a strategy. Like, in retrospect, I wish what had come out of my mouth, and not that it's a big deal, is I don't have to explain myself to you and, hanging up. But I got kind of sucked in, which was that strategy of, explain your boundary to me, because that was engagement, which was the whole goal of him trying to, he finally had a live person. A lot of people are not picking up their calls because so many of them are spam. So anyway, there's a lot here. I invite you to give yourself lots of self-compassion and lots of grace, And there are just some cool ways we can shift the energy around that give us a really neat upgrade on a really short timeline. And a lot of what I love to do is really fast track that up leveling and that growth and that elegance and that free flow of energy, because I think it makes a really big difference. The human experience is really unique of having this relationship to words and having your fullest, freest, most authentic expression in that area, to me, makes a really big difference in quality of life. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.